It's live, I think. Stop broadcast is on, so it has to be on. And I have live. Hi, everybody. I don't know if there's, how do I know there's 0 viewers, right? Okay, so let's hang up. Hi, everybody. I think we're live. This is the Ask Me Anything. My name is Nelly Yussupova. I'm glad to be here. I'm the CTO of Web Girls International and the founder of TechSpeak for Entrepreneurs, which is a 2-day boot camp designed to teach non-technical entrepreneurs how to build a project on time and on budget. I've been doing that for many, many years as a CTO of Web Girls. I've made a ton of mistakes, and I talked to lots of startups and created this program to address this huge need where entrepreneurs are getting ripped off simply because they don't understand the process. So what I decided to do with TechSpeak is teach my process that I use with developers, and I've been using it for over 15 years to launch the product on time and on budget. And what they allowed me to do is really see the red flags so that I can minimize mistakes. As entrepreneurs and human beings, we really can't avoid making mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. I make mistakes every day. The key is really to minimize mistakes, see the red flags sooner so that you can avoid the cost and the time that is involved to recover from mistakes. So that's a little bit about me. I also work a lot with startups as an outsourced CTO and a technology advisor. So I've been involved with the startup space and really understand how to build products and be a part of the ecosystem. Today, we're going to talk about technology and how to use and leverage it in your business, how to build that tech product, especially if you're a non-technical co-founder or founder. My first question will be to talk about my development process. What is the 10-step process? The number one reason why technology projects go awry is miscommunications between tech people and business people. They speak different languages. They have to because they have different roles. And there is an entire set of languages that technical people speak. So as a business person or non-technical person, your job is to really learn that language and understand a process. So the importance of a process in a startup is invaluable. A process is designed to help create more transparency in the business, so that if there are any issues, if there are any problems, you really can see them earlier. Without a process, things can take sometimes a year to uncover themselves or the problems. So what I encourage all entrepreneurs to do, not just in a tech space, but in every area of your business, to create a process so that you can keep a track of what's happening, what is getting done, what's not getting done, and really uncover those mistakes early. So I'm going to talk about my 10-step process, and I'm going to share my screen to show you the slide. Sorry, there. Can you guys see my screen? Okay. I got it. Okay, that you can see my screen. So here, the 10 steps to developing great ideas cost effectively, on time, and on budget. These 10 steps I really created over many years of development, and every one of these steps is important. It allows you to fail early, fail often, and fail cheap. This is a phrase that I use. It's a part of the lean startup methodology. And really the key is, as I mentioned, to fail early so that you can learn faster and course correct to success. And each step really has its purpose to allow you to fail early. The first step is to validate. I am, even though I'm a developer and a technical person, my goal is to never build a product or write a line of code unless there is a reason for it. Because any line of code, even though it can be 5 minutes to implement, is too much of a waste for me. So what I try to do, and the very first step in the process, is to really validate whether or not we need that feature, and by talking to customers, sharing getting their insights, and really baking those insights into the product and or the feature that we're building. So once we've validated the idea, the next step is to prototype it. There's many different ways to prototype, and writing code is also a way to prototype, but it's, again, very, very expensive. It's hard to recode things, or takes too much time. So since we're all about failing early and often and cheap, we use prototypes to define what our ideas are going to look like, so that we go to step 10 and show them to potential customers before we build. In step number 3, we refine the prototype by having our customers use the realistic prototype that we built without writing a line of code. Step number 4 is hiring the right people. Hiring is really, really important, and you need to have the right people for the job working on the project. There's an entire process for hiring, so there's really important step. Number 5 is picking the right technology. So there's many different ways to implement certain things. You can use custom code, which is, again, the most expensive. But on the other hand, you can use a lot of third-party applications through APIs. You can get a lot of functionality without really writing any code. So in step number 5, you really need to understand what are the different options that are out there, and allow you and the technology team to make a decision of what is the best way, what's the cheapest way to get that idea out the door so you can start testing it. The step number 6 is determining your MVP, which is the minimal viable product. So in your prototype, you might have 10 different features, but for your MVP, you might only build 5 of them. And the idea is to launch a product as quickly as possible, so that you can start to learn faster. And by the way, as I'm going through these steps and answering these questions, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat and we'll address them as soon as I'm finished with explaining the steps. Okay, so step number 7 is designing your MVP. So now that you have your minimal viable product, you need to quickly design it. And step number 8 is where you start to code, and project management is going to be really, really important. I'm a big advocate of agile project management. Agile project management is a way of taking a big project, and instead of taking 3 months to 6 years to launch something, we take the project and break it into smaller chunks. Smaller chunks are more manageable, and the chunks are at most 2 weeks. We call those sprints. And in the 2-week sprint, you really can uncover a lot of issues if there are going to be any. And if you make a mistake, you've only lost 2 weeks instead of 3 months or 6 months. Step number 1 is deploy. There's a lot of processes of taking your code from production environment to a live environment, or this is from your development environment to live environment. And it's basically copying code from one to the other. And there's a lot of ways to optimize how that happens. The reason why you want to optimize is because developers can make mistakes. And so the faster you can deploy and the more automated that process is, the fewer mistakes you're going to make. And step number 10 is track and analyze. Now that you have your product in the hands of customers, you really need to understand how they're using the product in order to optimize your product so that you can make decisions on which features to improve, which features to remove, which features to build next. So track and analyze is really important. Okay, so this is a summary of the 10 steps. Again, they allow you to fail early, often, and cheap. If you want to get into depth with us on in a little bit more depth with us, join us for the webinar next week. And Ian, can you send a link to the webinar so people can register? We're going to go into depth. It's going to be an hour and dissect a little bit of each of the steps. And if you really want to dive deep, then join us for the 2-day boot camp that we're doing on March 18th and 19th in partnership with SheWorx. And we'll tell you more information about that as well. Okay, so we got a question. What kind of third-party tools have you used in the past? Okay, so for example, I was just working with an entrepreneur, and a big part of their application was a chat feature. And we were determining whether to build that from scratch, which is going to take a lot of resources, and it's really complicated to build a chat. Or do we want to use a third-party tool and just using the API, connect with that third-party tool, and just essentially you're outsourcing that functionality to another company. And in a matter of hours, you have an entire chat functionality that you didn't have to build. And there's another company supporting and maintaining that functionality. They have sometimes hundreds of developers working on it. And so that's an example of using a third-party application to really cut down on development time. Any other questions so far? Great. So I'm going to go on to the next question. So the next question is, how do you determine which firm to outsource or offshore your development? So outsourcing or developing or offshoring is a big topic. And the reason why I feel so passionate about it is because entrepreneurs in the beginning can't necessarily afford to hire a full-time team. And so the only way for them to build their minimal viable product is to outsource it to another company in the US or offshore it. But if you don't have a process, if you don't have a way of communicating and removing those miscommunications, you're really going to make a lot of mistakes. And I've heard hundreds of horror stories where entrepreneurs really hired a lot of these type of companies, and I'm sure you have, especially with offshoring, and they lost a lot of money simply because they didn't know how to manage the process. So if you are going to offshore or outsource, these are the key things to find out in general. So the first thing is, who are you going to work with? Who are the developers that are going to be on your team? Oftentimes, development agency, like an agency company, is there, and they say, we have our own project managers and everything is going to be done. And the whole process is really a black box for the entrepreneur. They don't see on a daily basis what's happening with their product. They don't get to test the product up until it's 3 months later, and the 3 months is way too long to wait to uncover any kind of errors. Because if you see and test the product in 3 months and there's a ton of bugs, you're going to feel like you've been ripped off, or you got the wrong product, or there's too many bugs, and there's lots of disappointments all around, and a lot of time and money wasted. So what I would recommend that you do is implement a process. Even though they say they have a project manager, you say, well, this is how I'd like to work, and these are the rules that on a daily basis I need to have a call with the developers. The developers have to work for me and only on my project, which is going to be very tough for an agency to do, but the right agency will try to work with you. Because of the way that startups have to move really, really quickly, you have to have developers working for you directly. Even though they're working for another company, they're really only working on your project. The other thing that I think is important when you interview the developers, you have to make sure that you ask for references. So one of the mistakes that we made early on when we were offshoring is we did the interviews, right? We asked the company for a few references. And in the references, the developers and the company got amazing reviews. They were from Harvard, and like this, they did amazing work. And what we ended up actually getting, the developers we ended up getting, were not the same developers that worked for the company that we talked to. So that was a big problem, because they were not good, and we wasted, basically we had to start from scratch, because we wasted a lot of time and energy building with a team that wasn't productive. So that was a mistake on our end, and that I'm passing on now to entrepreneurs, to really only talk to and get references for the developers that you're actually going to work with. We have another question. What have been the most expensive mistakes you've seen entrepreneurs make? Okay, so the total amount would equal $60,000, $80,000, over $100,000. One entrepreneur I talked to, they've basically didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have any process in place, and so they blew through their first seed investment, which was $120,000, and it was a very, very expensive mistake. And there's no one specific mistake necessarily. It's a series of mistakes that you can make that add up and essentially can stall your entrepreneur endeavor. One story that I like to use that was the catalyst for me to starting TechSpeak was an entrepreneur who was non-technical, very sophisticated, used to manage over 200 people in her past, and just didn't know the process, didn't understand the technology, and didn't speak the TechSpeak, right? She didn't speak the tech language, and was working with a trusted consultant who was potentially going to become a co-founder. So there was a lot of trust with her. But because she didn't have, for example, an agile project management in place, it took her over a year to uncover that nothing was really done. There was a lot of promises. They had meetings. They did all of these things, but she never actually saw any code. And she paid this woman over a year's time, $60,000 of her own money, and really didn't see anything for it. And she was taken advantage of and ripped off. So the biggest mistakes are that the entrepreneur doesn't understand the process and doesn't have a process in place. And number two, that they don't understand the tech lingo. right? So they don't speak the language of tech people. Because if you don't speak the language of tech people, you're basically going to be rendered to the sidelines. You're not going to be a part of those conversations, so you won't be privy to why certain decisions were made. And years down the line, that can have a lot of consequences because you just don't know what's going to happen. Okay, so next question is, what questions should entrepreneurs ask development firms? That's a loaded question. The first thing, there are two things that I would want to make sure, and you might have a hard time finding a company that would go along with this. But two things that are important to me is that the developers that will work on my project will be working only on my project, and I would be able to have daily calls with them, so that we can really focus in and develop really quickly. So those are the two most important things that I found when working with agencies that is a must-have in order for a startup to be successful. Because your job as a startup is to launch as quickly as possible. So people ask me, how long should my minimal viable product take to build? And I say that if you have taken more than 3 months to build your minimal viable product, you have already taken too long. Because unless your product is in the hands of customers, you can't start learning. So that's the idea behind really getting the developers to work for you and with you. And in my process, there's a daily call with the developers so that we can check in, and we test code every 2 weeks. Okay. Next question, what is the best resources to find tech lingo? The first resource is, of course, the internet. There's a lot of information on the internet. If you want everything condensed to you, for you, I would just plug in TechSpeak. I've designed it specifically so that entrepreneurs can learn the lingo, and I will not just teach you the lingo, I'll also share my process with you, so that you can just borrow it, use it, and adjust it to your needs. If you don't want to do that, if you feel like you don't want to cut down, have everything kind of given to you on a silver platter, then the internet is there all the time. And going to technology meetups is another way to start to understand. At first, it's going to seem like it's foreign, but you're going to pick up a few things here and there, and that's how you get started. So lots and lots of resources out there. You just need to tap into them. One thing that I would have to say as an entrepreneur, you always have to weigh where your holes are. If you are non-technical and you know that you need to learn the tech lingo, you have to figure out how to fill those gaps as quickly as possible. So even though you could probably search online and it would take you 6 months, maybe a year to learn something, is there another resources like TechSpeak that can get you from point A to point B a lot quicker? So those decisions of time, right? Time is very, very big resource that entrepreneurs don't have. So time and money is really important for us. So you want to get to your answers as quickly as possible. Okay, so the next question is, how can you convince a tech founder to join your team as a non-technical co-founder? I get this asked all the time, and it's probably the most asked question that I get asked. So here's the reality. A technical person right now in this environment has so much opportunity. They can go get a job and get paid a lot of money for it. So for a technical person who has a lot of opportunity, you really have to have an amazing team, an amazing idea for them to just say yes, because there's so much opportunity. There's also a lot of risk involved in startups. 2 out of 10 startups fail. And that's a big risk. right? So what you should be thinking about specifically for the tech person who is afraid of taking a risk on a startup is, how can I de-risk the opportunity for them? Because the tech people who are not afraid of the risk of a startup, they're probably working on their own startup. That's just reality. So you only pool of tech people that you guys have to bring on as your co-founders and or technical people are the people who are risk averse, because they don't necessarily want to work in a startup yet. So how can you take the risk out of a situation? All the things that I'm teaching at TechSpeak is to get feedback from your customers, right? Validate your idea by talking to customers. When you're talking to customers, you can get letters of intent. Letters of intent are people, it's basically a signed document that says, I'm going to use your product. Sometimes they pay you to in your letter of intent as well. And if you get 200 letters of intent, then you go to your potential technical co-founder and say, look, I already got people lined up. Do you want to join me? That already takes a little bit of the risk out. The second thing you can do is build your minimal viable product yourself, right? A little bit skin in your game, fund it yourself. So the minimal viable product shouldn't take you or cost you a lot of money to build. And since I already set a limiter of 3 months, within 3 months, you can really build something. And if you understand the process, you can do it on the cheap. You really won't lose a lot of money by making mistakes and experimenting. So you will actually know who to hire, how to do it, and get it done. Then you can start to get customers, right? And prove some early traction. Get those customers with letters of intent on board. Start to refine your product. So now when you go to your technical person that you want, you can say to them from a position of power, not a position of need. I need you, versus here's a great opportunity. Use this opportunity to recruit that person, because you could tell them, look what I've been able to do without you. Imagine what we can do together. So it's just basically reframing the opportunity, and it works every time. Great. Next question. What is the best resource? Oh, we already answered that, sorry. If I have a CTO, does it make sense to do TechSpeak? Absolutely. So here's the dirty little secret that no one talks about. Developers don't necessarily know process. Okay, so a lot of developers just know how to write code. And in fact, I had a super technical person in Silicon Valley when we did the TechSpeak in Silicon Valley. He was attending TechSpeak, and he asked me the same question. He came to TechSpeak, and you can find his testimonial on the TechSpeak website. He said, if you don't want to be a code monkey for the rest of your life, come to TechSpeak, because he learned a lot of management processes that he never knew, right? Because in school, they only teach you how to code, and so they don't teach you process. TechSpeak is all about process. These are the steps that you should have when developing your product. And so absolutely, so if your tech team doesn't have a process, or they have a process that is not optimized, right? So some of you may already be in business for even 2 or 3 years, and you have a process, but it may not be the most optimal process. So they can pick up a lot of things from here that will help improve your process and make you much more efficient as a team. I had an entrepreneur, 2 brothers, attend from Miami. They came to New York a few years back. And again, you'll find their testimonial on the website. They said they already been in business for 3 years. And they told me that had they implemented this process 3 years ago when they started their company, it would have saved them over $500,000 and sleepless nights and all kinds of headaches. right? So it's all about improving your process. So I'm sure for those of you who already have a process, that's something that you can think about. So technical people, absolutely. Any other questions? I think we are out of time. It's 12:30. I wanted to thank you for joining me. If you have any other questions, you guys can feel free to contact me at nelly@digitalwoman.com. And if you want to attend TechSpeak, you can get a 10% discount. The discount code is SheWorx. And come and join us in March. It's going to be an amazing event, and it'll be worth, I promise you, worth every penny that you spend on it. Let me know if you have any questions.